President Trump's envoy to Ukraine stepping down, accused of doing damage control in the alleged plot to dig up dirt on Joe Biden ahead of the 2020 election. As Secretary of State Pompeo is subpoenaed. The red flags House investigators are looking for, with Rudy Giuliani on the defensive. We're following all the fast-moving developments this morning.
Breaking overnight, search for a shooter.
Oh my God!
Gunfire breaking out near a high school.
There goes the shooting.
3 people wounded, with students sent scrambling. The investigation this morning.
Tanker fire, the inferno erupting on a major highway, thousands of gallons of fuel exploding into a fireball. Traffic brought to a standstill for hours. What caused this massive explosion?
Tearful testimony.
Sorry.
The emotional day in court. A former police officer showing remorse for shooting her neighbor.
I wish he was the one with the gun that killed me.
Will the jury believe it was a case of mistaken identity?
And gone wild. An aggressive elk charges into a group of people,
Oh my gosh, somebody help.
repeatedly striking a woman with his antlers. Quick-thinking hero who rushed in to help her, speaking out this morning.
Live from ABC News in New York, this is Good Morning America.
Hey, good morning. So many fast-moving developments this morning in the White House whistleblower investigation, so let's dive right in.
Yeah, here's what we know right now as we come on the air. Overnight, the U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, stepped down. Volker's name was mentioned in the whistleblower complaint, and he's set to speak to investigators next week.
Also this morning, the Democrats have issued a subpoena for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. They want him to produce documents related to the investigation. Plus, we're learning new details about storage methods at the White House. Sources telling ABC News the administration changed how transcripts of calls with foreign leaders were stored after 2 calls in early 2017 were leaked.
We have team coverage this morning. Our legal and political analysts are standing by, but we start here with ABC's David Wright, who is at the White House with the very latest. David, good morning.
Good morning, guys. The uproar over Ukraine has now spread to the State Department. House investigators want to know if the president sought to enlist the Foreign Service to do his political dirty work, and that's led to the first subpoenas and the first resignation. The U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine resigned late Friday after the whistleblower accused him of doing damage control in the alleged effort to get Ukraine to dig up dirt on Joe Biden ahead of the 2020 election. Kurt Volker, a former ambassador, was sent to Ukraine in the wake of the Russia invasion. He's one of several State Department officials named in the whistleblower's complaint. That document, which sparked the impeachment inquiry, claims Volker and another ambassador sought to help Ukrainian leaders understand and respond to the differing messages they were receiving from official U.S. channels on the one hand, and from Mr. Giuliani on the other. Rudy Giuliani is the president's private lawyer. The whistleblower called him a central figure in the alleged effort to pressure Ukraine. Giuliani's name mentioned 30 times in the complaint. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo got served a subpoena Friday. House investigators hope to put State Department records under a microscope, paying careful attention to any mention of Giuliani. Giuliani told Sky News he was acting in an official capacity.
State Department asked me to help them deal with the Ukrainian government with regard to meetings with President Trump. The State Department doesn't investigate crime. I was asked to do this by the State Department.
Pompeo says he's satisfied all State Department officials had an appropriate mission.
To create a better relationship between the United States and Ukraine.
Speaking on MSNBC's Morning Joe, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the top priority for the impeachment inquiry is to sort out the facts as soon as possible.
We have to stay focused, as far as the public is concerned, on the fact that the President of the United States used taxpayer dollars to shake down the leader of another country for his own political gain. The rest of it is ancillary.
But the president won't make that easy, tweeting, "If that perfect phone call with the president of Ukraine isn't considered appropriate, then no future president can ever again speak to another foreign leader." Now, the former special envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, is due to be deposed by House investigators later this week. Most members of Congress have gone home for the August recess, for the fall recess, that is. But the leaders of this impeachment effort are still here. They need to get the ball rolling. Eva?
David, there's a lot of questions surrounding how the record of this phone call was stored. How did they end up on this top secret server? And now we're learning more about how this became the standard operating procedure for these kinds of calls between the president and world leaders.
That's right, Eva. Multiple sources tell ABC News that the White House changed the procedures and started using this classified server after earlier phone calls by the president to the leaders of Australia and Mexico were leaked to the press. Changing the procedures appeared to stop the leaking problem, but what's not known is if this was the procedure for all phone calls or just certain sensitive phone calls, and that's something that House investigators are going to really want to get to the bottom of. Eva?
All right, David Wright for us at the White House this morning. Thank you.
David and Eva, thank you so much to talk about here. So let's bring in a pair of ringers, ABC News Supreme Court contributor Kate Shaw, and from Texas this morning, ABC News Chief Political Analyst Matthew Dowd. Good morning to both of you. Kate, let me start with you. Let's start with this subpoena the Democrats have issued for documents from the Secretary of State. What's the significance to you, and is the administration likely to even comply with this? Because they have stonewalled in the past.
Right. So the whistleblower complaint this week is the beginning of a process. So the Democrats on the Hill are going to want to get access to information and to testimony. So this suggests to me that they're going to move quickly and that they're going to be pretty focused on what they ask for. And I think we're all going to be watching really closely to see what the White House does. They could fight this. They could take it to court. And a court, I think, will look at how strong their need for the information is and what the White House says about why it wants to keep the information back. And I think an impeachment inquiry is a strong reason the House can give for needing access to this information. So I think courts are very likely to side with the House investigators. The question, I think, is how quickly it all plays out. It could take some time.
You were saying earlier to me off camera that there's a possibility that the White House's argument, if they try to fight this, would be weakened by the fact that they've already released so many documents up until this point.
Sure, we have the whistleblower complaint. We had DNI McGuire's testimony this last week. They actually could have fought both of those things. And so I think that when you've let some things out, it becomes much more difficult to fight for secrecy around other things. So I think their position going into any litigation is not that strong.
All right, let's go to Matthew Dowd now. The Democrats say they're moving quickly on this impeachment process. We heard David Wright talk about that. There's talk of wrapping this up before the new year. Why is speed so important for them? And is speed good, politically speaking, for the president as well?
Well, I think speed's important for every side in this because, as you know and as Kate knows, this is not a conviction. This is basically the equivalent of a political indictment where they lay out the charges and then it moves to the Senate, which then the Senate has a process as equivalent of a trial of what the president did and what his punishment should be in this. So I think the speed is important because if it's not done this year, it needs to go to that trial, as I say, and the trial will be held in the Senate next year. So I think the president would be better off with a speedy resolution of this year. And I think the Democrats are better off getting this done and moving it to the Senate as quickly as possible.
Let's dig in on the risks for the Democrats specifically. If their goal is to get rid of Trump, a lot of people are asking, well, why not just wait 13 months and let the American people decide in the next election?
Well, I think the problem, Dan, that we have here is because this artificial creation has been made that a president can't get indicted. That's been created by departments of justice over the last 30 or 40 years. The only way to hold a president accountable for bad behavior or behavior that may come close to violating the law is impeachment between two elections. So over 4 years, the only way to hold a president accountable is impeachment in this. I think if the president is impeached, it's only the third time in history, so there's risk for the Democrats. This is something profoundly powerful that will affect the American public. I think the Democrats have to be careful that they don't get too far in front of the American public, that they get so far in front of the public that the public doesn't go along with what they're doing. So I think the Democrats have to be methodical, but understand this is an unbelievable, pointed, profound moment in American history.
And the polls show the American public deeply divided, as we have been for a while now. Kate, one final question to you. There's been a lot of talk about whether there's been a quid pro quo here? In other words, can the Democrats prove that the president explicitly said to Ukraine, you help me investigate Joe Biden or I'm going to withhold U.S. military aid? That would violate federal bribery statutes. But your point, as we were discussing earlier, again, off camera, is that you don't have to commit a crime to be impeached.
I think that's right. So the Constitution says impeachment is for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So I think because the word crime and misdemeanor are both in the Constitution, there's this tendency to think, oh, a high crime, that's like a crime, but a very serious one. And actually, high crimes and misdemeanors are actually quite different from ordinary criminal offenses. The idea has always been that therefore that this kind of a high crime and misdemeanor is a political offense, an abuse of office and of public trust. And so whether or not that kind of conduct violates a criminal statute is actually somewhat immaterial. So I actually think it's a mistake to get too bogged down in whether the elements of a federal crime can be established. But it does sound like that's at least somewhat how the conversation is playing out right now.
Kate Shaw and Matthew Dowd, thank you both. Really appreciate it. Whit, over to you.
Dan, thanks. The search is now on for a shooter this morning who opened fire near a California high school. Students running for cover when shots rang out. ABC's Marcy Gonzalez joins us from our LA bureau with more. Marcy, good morning to you.
Good morning, Whit. You're about to see just how scared some of those students were. Those gunshots were so close, the crowd gathered for Friday night football thought they were fired right there at the school. Oh my God! The sound of gunfire causing chaos at a high school football game north of San Francisco. Dozens of people panicking, running from the stands. Richmond police responding to reports of a fight just blocks away from De Anza High School when they immediately heard those gunshots.
I told the school to go and lock down, push everybody out the back. There was a lot of people on scene. They all fled in different directions.
Officers finding 2 people, a man and a woman, shot. First responders rushing them to a hospital.
Victim at Valley View in Morningside.
Police saying a 3rd victim arrived at a hospital on his or her own. Officers closing down a street across from the school as police searched overnight for evidence.
We do not know the status between the high school and the actual fight, so right now we don't know if it's linked to the school.
And that is one of the major questions this morning as police search for the gunman and try to figure out what led to the shooting. Dan.
Marcy, thank you. There is aviation news this morning involving more problems for Boeing. The company has notified the FAA of cracks on one heavily used 737 NG aircraft. Smaller cracks also reported on a few other 737 NGs. Late yesterday, the FAA announcing new inspection requirements for a number of the affected aircraft models. Boeing says there have been no in-flight issues involving these cracks.
Well, a city highway is reopened this morning, but it was a scary and dangerous scene when a tanker truck exploded into a fireball.
Overnight, a fiery inferno erupting on this major Kansas City highway. A tanker truck carrying both gasoline and diesel burst into flames after colliding with 2 passenger cars.
It had about 8,500 gallons of fuel on board.
The smoke billowing above, firefighters raced to the scene, desperately trying to put the fire out after using engine and ladder trucks.
We had to come in from the outer roads, put fire trucks on the highway, get supply lines to them so we could feed them with water.
Responders pouring water and foam onto the flames from every angle, backing up the interstate for hours.
5-6 of the lanes have significant spalling and damage to them.
Officers even diverting drivers away from the scene during the busy rush hour commute.
Amazingly, everyone survived. A person in one of the cars that collided with the tanker was injured, but not seriously. And looking at those pictures, it's hard to believe
absolutely.
It wasn't worse.
Yeah, definitely. All righty, but thank you. We do want to transition now to the latest on that nationwide spike of vaping-related illnesses. The CDC sharpening its investigation on products that contain the marijuana compound THC. Out of 805 confirmed and probable cases, more than 500 patients have given information about what they used. 77% reported using THC-containing products. However, health officials warn the cause of those respiratory illnesses is still unknown. So let's bring in ABC's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Jennifer Ashton, once again.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. We talked about THC there, and we know that health officials across the country, they're investigating these illnesses. is a clearer pattern starting to emerge in terms of what patients are experiencing?
Well, there is, as you say, still a lot unknown. We don't know if these were contaminated devices or so-called bootleg devices. We do know that the majority of them did contain THC, but medically, there was just a report out in the New England Journal of Medicine just September 6th that did a deeper dive on the cases in Wisconsin and Illinois. And we do know that the patients presenting to the hospital with this vaping-related illness, it's now being called acute toxic lung injury, had chest pain, shortness of breath, cough, GI symptoms, and fever, and almost 60% of them were then subsequently admitted to the intensive care unit, ICU. So we're talking about serious medical issues.
And bit by bit, we're starting to get more information. For people who are using these vaping products, though, even those who are using products without THC, what is the advice for them right now?
Well, listen, the New England Journal of Medicine article was very clear from a medical standpoint. Doctors encouraging people not to use e-cigs, and the CDC echoed that. They use different terminology. They said they are asking people to consider refraining from e-cigs, particularly those containing THC. So still evolving.
Important information. Dr. Ashton, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Whit.
Well, now to a tragedy in California where a collision left an experienced skydiver dead. ABC's Zachary Keish joins us with that story. Good morning to you, Zachary.
Good morning to you as well. It began as a routine skydiving run for frequent patrons of a longtime parachute center, but we're learning a combination of factors, including wind, may have contributed to this freak accident on a California highway. This morning, investigators are trying to piece together what caused an experienced skydiver to veer off course, leading to a deadly crash. Officials say a 28-year-old woman who had over 150 jumps under her belt was parachuting with 6 others 35 miles south of Sacramento.
One of the parachutists collided with the rear trailer of a big rig truck tractor combination.
After slamming into that truck, she was thrown to the ground on Highway 99 South. The woman was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators citing blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Bill Doss, who owns the nearby parachute center where the skydive originated, says the windy weather shouldn't have been an issue.
Was it windy? Yes. Was it too windy? No, not for her experience level.
Now, this isn't the only fatal incident for this skydiving company. The Sacramento Bee reports that at least 21 customers have died from accidents since 1981.
All right, Zachary Keish, thank you very much. Really appreciate your reporting. Let's switch gears now and check in with Robert Marciano for the latest on the weather. What's going on?
A couple of things going on. First off, some severe weather overnight. I want to bring you that information and video. This out of Manteno, Illinois, near Chicago. Winds are gusting, well, potentially near 70 miles an hour in that area. And they had an Oktoberfest going on. And you see that tent blown over. They had to cancel all the remaining activities. Nobody seriously injured, and that's always good news. Also, Peoria, Illinois. Just down the road from flash flooding there. We had torrential rains in that area. Also torrential rains across parts of northern Indiana. About 6 inches of rain falling just outside of South Bend. And they're taking on Virginia this afternoon. It should be dry by then, but you can see still some showers that are kind of firing along this front. That will drive to the south and east. And then all eyes on this guy. Potentially a historic storm here. I mean, we're getting some seriously cold air. For September, we do get snow in this area, but not this much. Winter storm watches or warnings are posted for multiple states, and it's going to be a long duration snow and wind event right through tomorrow. So all weekend long, and we could see wind chills in the teens and single digits. We could see snow totals up and over 2, 3, maybe even 4 feet. So an incredible, potentially historic snowstorm wrapping up for the northern west. That's what's happening in weather-wise across the national scale. It's time for a look at your local forecast.
And a very good morning. Meteorologist Brian Vandergraff in this morning for Alex Liggett. Temperatures this morning in the 60s. A little bit of mugginess out there, and you'll notice some cloud cover for sure. It'll be a mix of clouds and a little bit of sunshine today. Shooting for a high near 90. The record today is 91. Now, I can't rule out a shower or storm this afternoon, although I think the best chance would be west of the city. The heat, it does break tomorrow back in the mid-80s. A little cooler for Monday, near 80. And then look what happens later in the week. We could be back in the 90s by hump day.
It is a season for Oktoberfest celebrations. I know it doesn't feel like that across much of the East, especially with warm temperatures, but
Can you tell us your favorite part of Oktoberfest celebrations, Rob? curious.
The cute outfits that
That's right. That's right.
lederhosen and such.
Exactly.
Yeah, you look good in lederhosen.
With a pumpkin spice latte.
I thought it was some other drink other than lattes, but you know,
No idea what you're
as
talking
well
about.
as I thought.
Yeah.
Carry on, sir.
All right, thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. We do want to go to Modesto, California now, and a fiery crash landing on a highway. Take a look at this. A single-engine plane dropping onto the southbound lanes of Highway 99, catching fire and then shutting down traffic for a time. Only the pilot was on board, and he was not hurt. It happened just before 8 p.m.
To Georgia now, a would-be thief climbing into an SUV, look at this, and trying to start the engine as the owner fills the tank, apparently thinking he could get away unnoticed. The owner had a different plan.
I took the gas nozzle